Great. Let's get started. So, I'll quickly recap what we've discussed over the last couple of days and just pick up from there. So, even in the prep kit, we talked about three great mental skills, right? And the first day, we unpacked a little bit about harmonious practice, how to use the 6 hours to get your attention back to where you intended to be. We've all been discovering in our practice how the mind tends to continuously keep seeking different kinds of information. We also talked about the evolutionary context in which this information seeking behavior has originated, right? And the 6 hours allows us to gently bring our attention back to where we intended to be. In the case of the practice, that is the object of meditation. We recognize that our attention is entangled with something that is not our object of meditation. We let it be. Relax any tension and tightness that has come in our mind or our body. Smile and come back to our object of meditation. And no matter how many times our attention wanders away, we repeat this process. So, this is the 6 hours, right? And to many extent, a good analogy of this that a lot of people resonate with is assume that you have a gathering at your home, and there is somebody very important, maybe in whose honor you are having that gathering, right? For instance, if somebody's birthday or whatever, and you want to spend time with them. Somebody comes in uninvited. They're not your enemy. We talked about how distractions are our teachers. They are teaching where our attachments lie. They're helping us learn about the movement of our attention. They're helping us practice the skill of bringing our attention back. So, someone comes in uninvited. We don't fight with them, nor do we engage with them at the expense of going away from our object of meditation or the key person that we want to spend time with. So, we invite them in, we let them be, we relax any tension and tightness that might have developed in our mind. Why has this person come? I didn't ask for them to come up. What should I do now? I shouldn't have left the key person waiting while I go and attend this uninvited person. So we relax that tension and tightness that's developed in our mind, smile and come back. Right. So it's a lot like that. So different things will come in our mind, different things will occupy our attention. We don't fight with them, we don't engage with them. We don't judge ourselves for our attention having gone to them. Simply recognize that our attention is where we do not intend it to be. Let that thing be, because our attention is the fuel of our mind being away from our object of meditation. If we continue to give attention, either by engaging with it or by fighting with it, then we continue to be away from our object of meditation. So we let them be, relax the tension and tightness that develops in our mind, smile and come back. This is the first of the great skills, harmonious practice. The second is mindfulness, the ability to actually understand that our attention has gone away. We discussed how mindfulness is not just a high level concept like being non judgmentally aware of the contents of consciousness, but we actually want to understand the sequential movement of attention. And why is this important? This is important because our entire life is experience, is this sequence of attentional movements from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. That is essentially defining our experience of life. So, remembering to observe how our attention moves from one thing to another. There are a few components of this. Observing where our attention is in the first place, right? This is what helps us to identify whether our attention is with the object of meditation or whether it is with something else. Understanding how it is engaged with whatever our attention is on. Is it with craving, with that tension and tightness, or is it with ease? Understanding what are the different things that are competing for our attention. What are the things that are coming up in the background? Some of those things come up and they go away. They don't bother our attention. Some of those things come up and they take our attention away. And finally, watching that movement, how the attention moves from one thing to another. Because in this little movement lies the secret of understanding how experiences are formed. So the closer and closer we are able to observe this, the more granularly we are able to see how our attention, because our attention doesn't just simply move from our object of meditation to another object. There is a process. Something comes up, starts drawing your attention starts to wobble, starts slowly moving towards the other thing, and suddenly you find that you have completely let go of the object of meditation and you're with the new object. So, seeing how attention moves is also extremely important. So, this is the second great skill of mindfulness or sati or smriti, right? Remembering to observe how attention moves from one thing to another. Today, we are going to talk about the third skill, which is the skill of collectedness or samadhi. So, these are the three skills. So, if we remember, we talked about the Buddha presenting the crux of his teachings in the form of four noble truths: the truth of suffering, dukkha, the origin of suffering or dissatisfaction, right? Which is dukkha samudaya, and that is craving. Craving is the force that binds our attention to a certain object in a very personalized way with a sense of attachment. I want this, I don't want this. And the Buddha says, with the cessation of this craving, by not making it very personal, making it the most important thing for your existence, and being able to deal with this situation appropriately. Do what the situation demands of you rather than get caught up in the story of why you like it, why you don't like it, what is your opinion about it. Being able to do that, being able to act in that kind of a wholesome way without craving, by letting go of craving, we can exit the loop of dissatisfaction, right? That is the third noble truth, which is dukkha nirodha or cessation of suffering, which comes through the cessation of craving. And the fourth noble truth, the Buddha said, this is not just a theoretical equation that I'm telling you, but there is actually a way that you can train your mind for this. And that is the Noble Eightfold Path. We'll discuss the Noble Eightfold Path in more detail later in the retreat. But these three skills form the section on mental skills or the section on immersion in the Noble Eightfold Path. The three skills of mindfulness, harmonious practice, and collectedness. And today we'll unpack a little bit about collectedness. Yesterday I had ended the session with a little teaser where I talked about how, as we start training our mind to come back from any distraction without any violence back to the object of meditation, gently back, as we continue to do that, after a while, the mind starts to settle down. The craving that is present in your mind with regards to different distractions starts going down, and your mind effortlessly starts to stay with the object of meditation. Some of you are already experiencing this. Some of you are experiencing that your mind gets stabilized for a little period of time, and this period of time will get longer and longer. Okay. So let me just use a visual aid to discuss this. Give me one moment. I'll bring this up. Okay. So the gray bubbles represent our object of meditation. Every time our mind goes away to something else that is not the object of meditation, which is a distraction, our mindfulness informs us that our attention has gone away. And we use the 6 hours to bring our attention back to the object of meditation. And even our mindfulness is getting sharpened by the use of the 6 hours every time we recognize, right? So one of the things we do is when we recognize that our attention is drifted away, we make a small determination when we are coming back that next time we'll catch the attention a little earlier in its path to the distraction, right? A little earlier we'll identify that the attention is wavering, it is going towards another thought, another stimulus, and we will recognize it early and bring our attention back. As we keep doing this, so one thing I mentioned is that we learn through repetition. Any skill we learn through repetition. So as we keep repeating this, at some point our mind starts to stay with the object. Any distractions that come up, they come up in the background, stay in the background. If our attention doesn't chase after it, then we continue to stay with the object of meditation, and in some time we enter a collected state of mind, which is known as a jhana. So the Buddha taught 8 states, collected states of mind. What happens in these jhanas is the mind stays effortlessly with the object of meditation. They have very positive feelings, they have positive qualities associated with them, feelings of joy, of equanimity, of rapture, like extreme joy, different feelings of stability, confidence that are associated with these altered states, with these states called the jhanas. And I'll talk about these 8 jhanas briefly as you, the different people in the retreat go through the jhanas. I'll be discussing those jhanas in more detail with each of you. Some of you have already started going through them. So I'll discuss this in more detail with each of you. But till then, I just want to talk about the process a little bit, right? I will use an analogy of training a wild horse, right? So I think many of you are realizing now, especially if you're meditating for the first time, that your mind is far, far less cooperative than you think it is. Right? We always think that we can decide on something and we can go ahead and do it. But a simple task like stay with the object of meditation, and just simply wish myself well or wish a dear friend well. Just a simple instruction like that, the mind is unwilling to listen to. So what's happening is the mind is almost like a wild horse, and you have to, in some way, tame it, make it cooperate with you, make it friendly with what you want to do, right? So befriending the mind is one of the ways to think about this whole activity that we are doing. So every time, so one of the ways to try and tame the horse is to simply shackle it, right? And what happens is you have completely shackled the horse, it can't move, which is when we force ourselves to be with something. So one of the things I've repeated multiple times during this retreat is we don't want to force our mind to be free of thoughts. We don't want to force our mind to be with the object of meditation. We simply decide to stay with the object of meditation, and if our attention drifts away, we gently bring it back. We want our mind to cooperate with us in staying with the object of meditation. We don't want to force it. We don't want to crush mind with mind. We don't want to break mind's willpower. We don't want to wrestle it. We don't want to overpower it. We don't want to struggle with it. We want to train it to gently, effortlessly stay with the object of meditation. So when you have many distractions, every time your mind wanders away, right? This is an opportunity for you to actually learn how the mind is behaving, right? So just like if you were a horse trainer, the more time you spend with the horse, the more times you bring it back gently, the more times you see it misbehave, you are actually learning a lot of important lessons about how the mind is behaving, right? So just allow that to happen. So a good meditation is not about being able to force your attention to be a certain way. It is about observing your attention, learning how it is moving, and gently bringing it back. So as you start doing it, as you spend time doing it, the number of times you use your 6 hours multiple times, no matter how many times you have to, you are learning different aspects of your mind's behavior, and you have a rich mental model of how to deal with the mind in different situations, right? So if your mind gets distracted, Don't worry about it. It just means your mind may be a wilder horse to begin with than you might expect, right? So just bring it back gently every time, and every time you do that, you are learning a valuable lesson about how to deal with your mind. And on the other hand, your mind is also learning that, hey, all all I need to do is just kind of cooperate, stay with the object of meditation, and everything is well, right? I don't have to go chasing after that thing. One of the things we talked about is our mind continuously seeks information, seeks different distractions because it thinks that this is important for it for the survival. That if I stop seeking new information, something or the other will hurt me, right? So either I'll miss out on a very important threat to my life, or I will miss out on a very big opportunity for my life. So once we keep bringing it back, we are in a very stable environment, we are not going anywhere, there's no physical threat that is perceived, there is no interaction that's happening with the rest of the world at that point of time in your sitting meditation, your mind finally decides to cooperate, right? So that is where you want to become familiar with your mind's movement, with your attention's movement. You want to see how it misbehaves, and you want to slowly train your mind to actually cooperate with you and stay with the object of meditation without a struggle, without forcing it, without shackling it. Because as soon as you the problem with shackling your mind is, as soon as you remove those shackles, it will misbehave even more violently. And this happens with a lot of people who try to force extreme concentration. And in fact, this is one of the ways that concentration practices have been the Buddha's teachings have been misinterpreted by many people, trying to force mind to be in a certain way. And as soon as they're out of that situation, all the other things, all the misbehavior just pops up again. So it's like a beach ball that you're trying to submerge underwater. You cannot do that. It will spring back with double force, right? So what we are doing is learning how the mind misbehaves and teaching the mind that, hey, I'm not going to judge you every time you drift away. I'm simply going to gently bring you back to the object of meditation, and that's it. I have no will, no agenda to overpower you or to force you to be a certain way. This is just what we want to do, and let's cooperate. Let's be friends and do this. So when we do that, the mind cooperates, it stays with the object of meditation, and that feeling is, and we get into these different states. So I'll talk about the states, and I'll talk also about the relation of these states with the object of meditation that we are using, the metta, right? So I'll talk about that. But before I do that, right, I also want to talk about, so what happened suddenly that our mind, which has been evolutionarily hardwired to always look for information, so why is it that suddenly now we are able to stay with the object of meditation, stay without drifting away? So what changed in that, right? So for this, I just want to talk a little bit more about how our mind works in different situations. So just like we have a mode for information seeking, and we have a mode for dealing with adversity, which is often known as the fight, flight, or freeze. So every time there is a threat that our mind perceives, so it goes into a fight, flight, or freeze mode. Or at the same time, if there is a very big opportunity, it goes into a similar state of arousal, right? So your mind and body says that this is the most important thing right now. I have to do this, right? And while in prehistoric times that might have been running away from a wild animal or running towards a source of food before it gets away from you if you're hunting, or if some before somebody else steals it if you're competing with other creatures, right? So you go into an extreme state of arousal for action, right? And this is the typical state. But what happens in this state is, this is called the sympathetic state of the autonomic nervous system, right? What happens in the sympathetic state is, in the fight, flight, or freeze mode. So all our resources, so we have limited resources in our body, right? All these resources become diverted towards action, right? So adrenaline starts coming in, and so basically resources are diverted away from healing and restorative kind of states, and they go towards states of, you know, self-preservation and survival. And what happens is every time we are getting new information, typically this is the mode that we are in. The only mode typically that we experience the complementary system, right? So there is a complement. If we keep doing this, then we don't get enough time to heal our internal system. Mentally, we don't get time to assimilate all the information, make, new learnings, etc. So we are always in a state of continuous panic. The counterpart of this is the parasympathetic nervous system. And what the parasympathetic nervous system does is it says, okay, there is no danger right now. There is no great opportunity. So let's do something. Let's do very hardcore maintenance, right? So let's rest, let's heal, let's digest, let's assimilate our information and knowledge to make sense of things. And that typically happens when we're sleeping. But even for that to happen, we need to really experience restful sleep. This is called the parasympathetic nervous system. So the counterpart to feelings of greed and aversion, restlessness, sloth, right? So, and doubt, these kind of feelings that are filled with uncertainty, filled with desperation to get new information, to figure out what will help us to live better, what will help us to get more guarantees about our success, what will help us to get what we deeply desire, what will help us to stay away from the things that we fear or the things that we hate, right? So when we go away from this mode, we actually start doing a lot of restorative work for both our mind and our body. And this is the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have that counterpart. And just like we have, fear and lust or greed and aversion driving us, we have a counterpart to that, which the first of which is metta or loving kindness. So when you're in a feeling of loving kindness, you are not actually worried about different things. When you stay with the object of meditation, which is loving kindness, you stay with in the parasympathetic state, right? So you are not worried about what you are getting out of it by, wishing yourself well. When you're thinking about your friend, you're wishing your friend well, you're not worried about what is in it for me as much, right? So these are very important, not just from a healing perspective, but also from the perspective that we are we have evolved as social creatures, right? So social creatures or tribal creatures. So if all humans were only acting out of 100% selfishness at all points of time, then it will be impossible for two people to cooperate. So for two people to cooperate, and what has happened is evolutionarily this has worked to our advantage, that when humans cooperate, they actually improve the chances of all of them to survive better, right? So there are these things related to cooperation, related to not being always in a state of threat. So we are able to take care of each other. We are able to take care of a child till it grows and becomes viable to take care of itself. We are able to take care of friends. We are able to be kind even to strangers. And many of us would have received many times the kindness of strangers or even simply friendship, right? So there is no transactional advantage that we get out of that. But we are able to do that because we are social creatures, and we have this system that is not just parasympathetic, but that is related to cooperation with other beings, not just always being in fear of everything, not just always being in competition with everything. And four of these feelings are something that can be cultivated to create extremely positive states of mind, extremely healing and restorative states of mind. We have started with the first. So that seed exists in us. So just like that seed of fear, fight, flight, or freeze, the fear of greed, the seed of greed and aversion lies within us, right? The seed of selfishness lies within us, that always I need to see what is in it for me. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Why I like it, why I don't like it. Just like that, there is a seed of altruism or seed of cooperation that is also in us. Right. The first is loving kindness. So we are first starting by watering this seed so it can become a sprout. And this is by sending the feeling of loving kindness to ourselves and then to our friend. Lowest hanging fruit, easiest thing to do. We start with that. And then we slowly, as we start progressing in the practice, we start sending it to more people. With metta, what happens is we can already start accessing these states of where we are in a sustained state of parasympathetic state, a healing restorative state of our mind and body, and we are in a state where the mind understands that currently we are not experiencing any threat, nor are we missing out on any opportunities. So we can actually spend time understanding our attention. We can actually spend time sending that wish of goodwill to a friend. So we start doing this and we get into the jhana. So the feeling of metta takes us through the first four jhanas, right? So these four jhanas or four states are successively more and more stable. So in what happens is, as you go deeper in the jhanas, your mind wavers less. It stays with the object for a longer period of time, and the number of distractions that come up start becoming lesser and lesser, and you're also able to see how your attention deals with those distractions in slow motion. From there, at some point, the feeling of loving kindness changes to a feeling of compassion. How does this happen? So, compassion, we need to understand compassion is not feeling the pain of others. Right? So, what happens is, as we start this practice, as we start understanding how our mind goes chasing after different things, getting personally attached with that, wanting a certain outcome, right? We understand that this creates a lot of dissatisfaction for us. The fact that our mind is always worried about different things, always thinking about, instead of things that where we have actions that we can perform, it is thinking about things way more in the, way in the future, what might happen then, or things that are way in the past, that what happened then, I like it, I don't like it. Your mind keeps going to these kind of things. And simply because we are not able to make friends with our mind, simply because we are evolutionarily hardwired to be desperately seeking information all the time, we create a lot of dissatisfaction and suffering for ourselves. As we start understanding this, we also start understanding that when our mind gets attached with craving to different things, we start taking decisions that are always fight, flight, and freeze in nature. So, when, for example, we get into an argument with somebody, right? And all of us can reflect to at least some arguments in which, after some point, it is not about the purpose of an argument, ideally, is to come up with a better line of reasoning that I have a point of view, you have a point of view. Now, by debating this, we are able to come to a better point of view for both of us, right? A better understanding of the world. But instead, what actually happens is two people get into an argument and then they are protecting their identities. They protect their identities as if they are battling an animal in the wild. I need to win. No matter what I do, I need to win this argument, right? And they say and do things that are hurtful and harmful. By doing this, we create our own suffering, right? So by doing that, we create suffering for others. We create our own suffering. We get agitated. We get frustrated. We are not able to let things go. Take a simple example of somebody cutting you off in traffic and you spend hours thinking about what you will do to them, or you want to chase them, or you want to shout at them, you want to have an argument with them, or you want to get a bigger SUV so you can be more dominating on the road, so you start thinking in these terms, and uh, as a result of that, you are wasting many many hours of your life. You're creating your own suffering out of that. Your mind is spending times in states of agitation, states of displeasure. As we start understanding how we create our own suffering and how we tend to act very compulsively, so we don't intend to do a lot of things just pop up in our mind, and then we get caught up in this way of I like it, I don't like it. As we start understanding this, we also start understanding that other people are behaving in the same way. We think whenever we do something wrong, we think that it's something accidental, and whenever we do something good, we think it is intentional. And the reverse applies for somebody we don't like. Every time they do something good, it is accidental. Every time they do something bad, it is intentional. right? So we think in terms of good person and bad person, that this person has access to all the information to know that this is a good action, and still they choose to do something else, right? And that is because they're a bad person. We start to think of those things. We don't understand that they struggle with their mind, with their attention, with their compulsive tendencies, with those hardwired fight, flight, freeze, always compete with the world kind of wiring that is inside them, just like it is inside us. As we start to understand this, we start to understand how others are also creating suffering for themselves and for others, without realizing that this is just a compulsive behavior. And this is the basis of compassion. Once we start to understand our own suffering, we feel greater compassion for others. We understand their suffering. We can see how their compulsive tendencies are getting them stuck in certain thought processes, and we can be kinder to them. So, this is compassion, as opposed to, say, empathy, which is about literally feeling this pain of another person. You're replicating in it, but that pain in yourself, but you're not really understanding anything, and therefore you're not in a position to actually help them out. Whereas in compassion, you are understanding how that suffering is happening for them, and you are using that understanding to be more effective in supporting them. So, loving kindness graduates to compassion, and compassion takes you to the fifth jhana. In the fifth jhana, so one of the things that you may feel as you progress through the different jhanas is that you start losing the sensation of the body. So it is not like you're actually levitating or bodiless, but what's happening is your mind says that there is not too much activity happening in the body. There doesn't seem to be any great bodily threat around. So let us focus less on the activities of the body, the sensations of the body, and instead it focuses more on the mental realm. So karuna or compassion takes us to the first of the formless jhanas, that it's called. So the fifth jhana, or the base of infinite space. So we'll talk more about these jhanas later on. And at this point, I just want to tell you about the different states, and more importantly about the progression of the Brahmaviharas. As we start understanding the suffering of others better, it goes into something very interesting called mudita. There's no great English translation for this, but you can literally say mudita is feeling joy irrespective of whether there is something good happening for me or for another person. So it is almost altruistic joy. So you see somebody else. So this is another evolutionary challenge that we have, right? So we are actually kind of, evolution has given us two modes, one which makes us more animalistic and one which makes us more wise, right? And typically the forces of competition in the world chooses to continuously nurture the competitive, fearful, distrustful, agitated, animalistic part of us. And we are actually now going on the other side. So, as we start understanding the suffering of others, we actually feel a sense of joy if something good happens to others and their suffering is alleviated as a result of it. What the animalistic tendency is to, as soon as we learn that something good has happened for someone, we tend to see it as a failure for us. We tend to see that this other person for whom something good has happened, now they're higher in the hierarchy of the world and we are a little lower. Somebody got a raise, and immediately there is a twinge of why didn't I get a raise, or why am I not lucky? That person is lucky, or some storytelling like that. Another person got a car, and I've been wanting a car for 3 years and I've not been able to afford it. Right. So that kind of thought always accompanies that. So mudita is being able to completely be appreciative in your joy at the alleviation of another person's suffering, rejoicing. Join in the joy of another person. And finally, when we see all these things, the most so before we move to that, so mudita or rejoicing takes you up to the sixth jhana, or the base of infinite consciousness. What happens in this is also a formless jhana. You start actually seeing the very beginning of the appearance of different thoughts in your mind, right? So we currently now start identifying thoughts. When we are in the middle of that, we recognize that our mind is drifted away. So we'll talk more about this when we discuss. So we are going to zoom in further. We are going to see exactly how each thought is coming up, how our mind moves through that. We'll discuss this in more detail at that time. But rejoicing takes you to the base of infinite consciousness. And as we start understanding and others' suffering and celebrating in the elevation of their suffering, finally we come to upekha or equanimity. Understanding that things are not good or bad or pleasant or unpleasant by themselves. And actually, this goodness or badness is captured in our interpretation of those things. So, when things happen, no matter whether they seem to be beneficial or harmful, we simply understand that they have happened. We don't get caught in the value judgment or how we feel about them, but instead we understand what has happened and we try to see what is the most appropriate thing to do. So, just seeing how, as our mind starts to understand how compulsive behavior keeps making us chase after information, making us form opinions of it, making us want it or making us not want it, making us, have an aversion for it, and how that causes us to act in compulsive ways, how that completely hijacks our mind away from what we may actually want to do, how it makes us helpless. Like, you have a certain thought and you just can't let go of it. That person said something to you in office, or that person cut you off in traffic, and you just can't stop thinking about it, right? So how our mind can go that way, understanding that, slowly understanding that process better and better, seeing that everybody is a victim of this kind of uncooperation from their mind, takes you towards the understanding that others are suffering, that it's a good strategy to be kind to them, taking joy in the elevation of their suffering, and finally understanding the actions of others, the things that happen are not inherently good or bad, but they are always seen by us through a certain lens which is driven by that animalistic thing, that no matter what happens, first thing I have to see is it, what is in it for me, is it a threat or is it an opportunity, right? So instead of seeing things as threats and opportunities only, we see things as they are, and we see if there is a appropriate action that we can take, right? So that is the progression, going from how we can go from that feeling of being extremely animalistic to using the other side, which is kind and cooperative, and which is also connected with actually restorative states of mind and body. I won't go into this. This is a little bit of a detail. So this is maybe towards the end of the retreat we can talk a little bit about this, the difference between samatha and vipassana, and samatha vipassana. These are terms you may have heard, but for now let me just say that let me just call out the meanings of these things. They're available in your prep kit as well. Samatha means uh, tranquil state of mind that is receptive to learn, and vipassana means insights that about the activities of the mind, about the processes of the mind. And samatha vipassana is essentially, like we have given the example in the prep kit, being able to see the mind in a state, in a relaxed state, in a agenda-less state, being able to see the activities of the mind in a very calm, very stable state. You know, it's like reading a book in a well-lit, very stable room, a book with large font and not too many divergent streams of information, right? So the jhanas are where we can actually do this. So jhana is that well-lit room with that, nicely font-sized book where you can really, really get deep into the understanding of the mind. In fact, a lot of people think about breath or just use the term mindfulness. The jhanas are the route to awakening that the Buddha describes in almost a third of the middle length discourses. So we discussed a small excerpt from a middle length discourse yesterday, but out of the 152 discourses that he gave, in 52 of them, he talks about the jhanas as the path to awakening. And what also happens during the jhanas is we are learning to So the habitual patterns that we have, right? So our mind keeps going after certain things, keeps getting attached to those things. We are also transforming that as we keep letting go the craving. Every time we use the 6 hours, we keep letting go the craving. When we stay in the jhana, our mind stays without craving. So that craving is just a representation of that animalistic instinct, that habitual compulsive way of behaving. And we start softening our habitual attachment to many things when we spend more time in the jhanas. It's a very deeply restorative state, both mentally and physically, and it deepens all the skills. The skill of collectedness, being able to stay with our object of meditation without any effort, without fighting with our attention, being able to remember to observe how attention moves, and finally being able to bring our attention back from a distraction or a rabbit hole with ease. Right. So I've been speaking for a while. Happy to hear any thoughts or questions.
Nothing as such, Rajiv. I think everything is clear.
Great. Yeah. So absolutely, I think uh, we all instinctively understand these things, right? It's just that what is important, the reason of doing this kind of a practice, the reason of doing a retreat is actually to understand the technique. And what has always evaded everyone is actually being able to practice a very well structured skill to be able to see these in your own experience and actually understand them deeply. We all have a sense of this. We all know that from time to time we get very selfish, we get very compulsive in our actions, and we do things, we know that we do things that hurt us and hurt others, right? And what we need is a way to understand, make friends with the mind, and that is the idea. So spending time with the technique, actually practicing, is the only way. Understanding this intellectually is going to be yet another TED talk, right? So you need to practice, you need to put in the time and slowly start making friends with your mind, right? And I just want to comment about the practice called the forgiveness practice, right? So the forgiveness practice is related to this Brahmaviharas. So we talked about the seed and nurturing that seed, and letting it grow from metta to uh, upekha or samatha, right? Equanimity. So what happens is sometimes because of our past experiences, especially more traumatic or stressful experiences that we've had, it becomes a little difficult for this to sprout. And you can think about it as the equivalent of having a lot of rocks in your soil. And sometimes we need to clean the rocks out of the soil before we are able to properly allow this plant of wisdom to grow within us. And what we do is we use a practice called forgiveness that helps us to let go of certain things in our mind that tend to always be a little distrustful of unconditionally giving, right? So somewhere there is a some mechanism in us that is telling us, hey, but what's in it for me, or will I get hurt if I'm continuously in an unconditional giving state of mind, right? So we use a practice called forgiveness, which is unconditionally forgiving things that have happened in the past, things that you have done, things that others have done with you. Simply understanding that not forgiving is actually creating a problem for you to move towards wisdom. There is nothing you can actually change in the past, but keeping a grudge against something that you have done, keeping a judgment, being attached to that judgment, is actually something that comes in the way of your own progress. Being able to make peace with that, being able to make resolution with that, is actually something that makes this soil extremely fertile and really hypercharges the growth of metta to karuna to mudita to upekka, right? Some of you have been recommended this practice, others will be recommended this practice when it is going to be most useful for your practice. So whatever practice has been recommended is based on what is going to be most effective for you at this point of time. Great. So I'll pause a minute for any questions, and then we can wrap up today's session with sharing the merit.
Rajivji, one question I have: what do we
Yes.
actually, what do we actually radiate after the metta?
After the metta, are you talking about the progression to the Brahmaviharas?
Yes, I'm talking about the fifth jhana.
Yes.
Once we, what changes from, how does it go from metta to karuna? How do
It so it is just so the different jhanas, right? So there is the different feelings, the Brahmaviharas that we are using, they sustain till certain jhanas. So metta sustains from the first to the fourth jhana.
we, right?
Karuna can also be at the first to the fourth jhana, but metta is the more let's say more predominant flavor, right? So like in a food you will have a dominating flavor, right? So metta is the easier thing for us to understand and start with, right? So it is simply wishing someone well. It doesn't require you to understand your own suffering and another person's suffering. So that becomes the first uh, basis, right? But the metta cannot, the feeling of metta cannot be your object of meditation beyond the fourth jhana, right? So as we go into the formless jhana, so then it changes to karuna, right? And again, equanimity is something that can be there through all the jhanas, but compassion is the next predominant flavor, right? So successively, these are more and more subtle. So at the fourth, the metta kind of that is where it can take you. It cannot take you further. And as you go towards the formless jhana, then karuna becomes the predominant feeling, the compassion, and then mudita or joy becomes the predominant feeling, and then equanimity. After the seventh jhana, even like equanimity itself is extremely subtle. After the seventh jhana, even equanimity becomes disturbing for the mind, and then you go into the quiet mind. So you stop radiating anything. So the Brahmaviharas take you up to the seventh jhana. They don't take you further than the seventh jhana, and then but because your mind is already very stable, it goes further to the eighth jhana as well.
So do we just do the process and everything else happens on its own?
Yes, yes, yes. So what happens is initially you will not understand the different jhanas that are happening. You're just hurtling through them, right? So you will not be able to identify. Again, it's like driving very fast through a street in a new town, right? You don't understand the markers that are happening. You are just driving, you're just taking care of seeing how people are behaving. You have maybe a new vehicle, right? And you're just going there, you don't have an understanding of where you are exactly, right? So when initial practice, people just go through the jhanas. It takes a while before you start understanding. So it doesn't matter which particular jhana in it. That is for much more advanced practice. But being in the jhanas themselves is simply putting you in a deep restorative state and a great state for actually understanding the mind very deeply. Okay. So at this stage, it is not very important to understand which jhana you are, just being there. It is important for me. These things are important for me, for example, because it allows me to understand where you are in your practice and make tweaks. So by the what happens in the interviews, the question that I ask allow me to get a sense of where you are in your practice and what tweaks are required, right? So if you whatever accessories your car needs to be to go through a certain part of that city, so I'll make sure that you have those accessories, right? So for you just don't need to think of anything else other than whenever my mind gets distracted, I want to bring it back with the 6 hours. I want to have a healthy interest in trying to observe the movement of the mind as early as I can. That is the only thing for you to do. So, and that will remain the only thing for you to do. So, all the other things are secondary, the different jhanas. So, uh, once you start getting very comfortable with the jhanas, once you start going very deep in your practice, you can start identifying the difference between different jhanas, different feelings, and stay with them. But and you will also be able to bring up these feelings immediately. So if a situation requires loving kindness, even now, even after a week's practice, you will be able to start bringing up loving kindness whenever a situation demands it, compassion when it demands it. But over time, those become very, very clear and defined, right? So it's literally, this button, like you have four buttons on the wall, and this one turns on loving kindness, this one turns on compassion, this one turns on joy, this one turns on equanimity, and you can put your mind in that state as immediately on command, right? So that's where eventual practice can take you. Great. So we'll share some merit, and few of you were unable to join in your interview slot. So I'll call you one by one. A couple of you, I'll call you one by one now. Okay, to do your interviews. Let me just share the screen, and we'll share some merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May enlightened beings of mighty power share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a lovely
Thank you,
rest of the
Adi.
evening, and catch you tomorrow.